In the dead of night, a sealed envelope was hand-delivered to the palace security office. Within hours, Prince Andrew's royal protection team was stripped, silenced, and reassigned. What prompted King Charles to make such a ruthless decision without warning? Palace insiders reveal a breaking point that had been simmering for months until it exploded in a quiet act of royal retribution. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The corridors of Buckingham Palace were silent when the order came through, but the tension was deafening. At precisely 2:14 a.m., a confidential directive signed by King Charles himself landed in the secure inbox of the Royal Household's Intelligence Office. There were no second opinions, no briefings, no room for reconsideration. By sunrise, Prince Andrew's entire security apparatus, trained for decades to protect a royal, was quietly dismantled. The guards who once shadowed his every move were reassigned to other members of the family, some even told never to speak of their former post again. The air inside the palace was thick with unease as staff members exchanged glances but dared not ask questions. This wasn't a budget cut. This wasn't routine. This was personal. Whispers began to surface almost immediately. Some believed the king had been brooding for days. Others claimed the decision was made in a single flash of fury after a disturbing confrontation. But what no one doubted was the intensity of King Charles's demeanor in the hours leading up to the order. Described by one insider as cold and unrelenting, the king reportedly ignored phone calls, declined meetings, and spent the evening alone in his private study. Several aides claim he tore up a letter, its contents unknown, and poured himself a drink he hadn't touched in years. It was the look on his face when he emerged emotionless, deliberate, and silent that said more than words ever could. By 6 a.m., Andrew was no longer under royal protection. There was no official announcement, no press statement, no explanation. Members of his household learned of the change from a hastily forwarded memo. Even those closest to him were left scrambling, uncertain whether to prepare for a reinstatement or a complete severing of ties. But one thing was crystal clear: this was not a clerical error. This was a calculated severance, a decision made not just with power, but with intent, and in the vacuum that followed, theories spread like wildfire. Was this about the lingering scandals that refused to die, or had Andrew taken a step too far behind palace walls? Was the king sending a message not only to Andrew, but to others who might test the limits of royal patience? For a monarch who has often been criticized for indecision, this act was nothing short of brutal. It was as if Charles had waited patiently, methodically, for the perfect moment to strike, and when it came, he did not flinch. But to understand the fury behind this midnight move, we must go deeper into a web of scandals, confrontations, and a brotherhood long eroded by betrayal. They once walked side by side as princes, but decades of whispered jealousy, public scandal, and private slights have turned this brotherhood into a cold war of calculated moves. Sources say Charles's growing resentment towards Andrew wasn't just personal, it was strategic. And now, it's turning deadly political. Behind the golden gates and ceremonial smiles, a deeper rivalry had been festering for years. It began long before scandal ever tainted Andrew's name, back in their youth, when the Queen's quiet favoritism tilted in the direction of her second son. While Charles was groomed for duty, Andrew was allowed freedom. Where Charles was burdened with protocol and the weight of the crown, Andrew was indulged in military glory and royal affection. Insiders describe a long-standing bitterness, a quiet pain Charles never voiced, but never forgot. He was the heir, but Andrew was the favorite, and that imbalance carved a fracture that only widened with time. As Charles matured into his role, embracing decades of royal responsibility, Andrew's behavior veered into recklessness. From questionable friendships to tone-deaf interviews, every public misstep by Andrew sent shockwaves through the monarchy, and each time, Charles was the one left to answer. The elder brother, always forced to clean up the mess of the younger. But what made it worse was Andrew's refusal to retreat. Even after crisis upon crisis, even after losing public trust, Andrew continued to operate as if nothing had changed. That defiance, insiders say, enraged Charles more than any scandal ever could. The tension reached boiling point in private moments. The public never saw tense dinners where neither brother acknowledged the other. Icy glances in council meetings, conversations that devolved into silence. Palace staff began to notice the growing chill. One senior aide claimed the brothers hadn't exchanged more than a handful of words at family gatherings in over a year. But beneath the cold exterior, a storm was brewing. According to one confidential source, Queen Camilla encouraged Charles to assert control before Andrew's behavior dragged the monarchy into further disgrace. She told him enough was enough, the source revealed. And he finally listened. Charles's closest advisors, too, began pushing a hardline approach. Their message was clear. Andrew was a liability, and liabilities weaken the throne. There were whispers in private meetings, cut the rot before it infects the crown. And so, a shift began, not loud, but lethal. Charles started making moves behind the scenes, building the case to sever ties without appearing vindictive. Every headline, every misstep, every ignored warning added weight to the final decision. But Charles didn't act until Andrew made one final, irreparable mistake. It wasn't just about family anymore. It was about the integrity of the crown and a monarch who had run out of patience. As the palace turned into a pressure cooker of resentment, Andrew made one final fateful move that would seal his downfall. Palace insiders say it was one move too many. A private meeting, a hushed demand, and a confrontation that left Charles reportedly livid. What exactly did Andrew say or threaten that sent his older brother into a fury strong enough to revoke royal protection overnight? The tension had reached a fragile ceiling, but Andrew, perhaps emboldened by past leniencies or deluded by his shrinking circle of loyalists, pushed harder than ever before. According to highly placed sources, Andrew arranged a discreet meeting with a foreign dignitary, a move that bypassed all protocol and raised immediate red flags within the Royal Intelligence Division. The meeting, held under the guise of a personal engagement, was in fact part of a larger effort by Andrew to revive his influence by leveraging what little weight his title still carried. But what he failed to consider was that the crown was no longer in the hands of a passive observer. Charles, now king, was watching and ready. When reports of the meeting landed on the king's desk, there was initial disbelief. An unauthorized interaction with a high-ranking international figure wasn't just improper, it was dangerous. Especially given the strained global reputation Andrew had already amassed. Then came the security breach, subtle but telling. One of Andrew's former aides, now under independent review, allegedly accessed confidential palace communications. Though no public connection was made, insiders reveal that this incident served as the perfect cover to re-evaluate Andrew's entire security clearance. But what triggered the final collapse was not the breach. It was what happened behind closed doors, in the king's private study. On a stormy evening, Charles summoned Andrew not to discuss, but to confront. The confrontation was described as unprecedented by two staff members who overheard fragments through the thick, locked doors. No one had ever heard the monarch raise his voice like that. Charles accused Andrew of manipulating royal assets for personal gain, of exploiting the residual power of his title to create dangerous alliances. But it was Andrew's response that turned the air to ice. In what insiders called a thinly veiled threat, Andrew reportedly referenced undisclosed royal correspondences, private letters, emails, internal memos saying it would be regrettable if they ever found their way into public hands. A line had been crossed, not just between brothers, but between monarch and liability. Charles didn't respond with words. He didn't argue. He didn't even shout. Instead, he stood up, stared his brother down, and walked out without a word. That silence, aides say, was thunderous. Within 24 hours, Andrew's protection was revoked. No appeals, no delays, no mercy. The move sent shockwaves through royal offices. This wasn't a disciplinary action. This was a purge. For the first time in decades, it became clear that Charles was no longer a man, balancing family ties and royal image. He had become something else entirely, a monarch who had run out of second chances to give, and when Charles emerged from that confrontation, something in him had changed. What followed next would rattle not just Andrew but the entire royal establishment. In the shadow of Andrew's downfall, a quiet reshuffling began. Royal security chains were restructured, and those closest to Catherine and William found themselves elevated. Was this Charles tightening the reins or handing over control to the next generation? While the media fixated on the brutal severing of Andrew's protection, inside palace walls, something far more calculated was underway. The removal wasn't just a punishment, it was a signal, one that rippled through the hierarchy like an unspoken decree. No longer would past prestige shield anyone from consequences, and in that vacuum of royal silence, a new order began to emerge. Behind the scenes, the offices tied to the Prince and Princess of Wales began to swell in influence. Staff previously considered ceremonial suddenly found themselves in confidential briefings. Private secretaries who once operated from the sidelines were now fielding directives meant for the highest tier of royal security. It wasn't publicly declared, but anyone paying close attention knew power was shifting. Princess Anne, known for her stoic composure, was one of the first to be briefed. Those present during her private audience with the king described her reaction as grim but silent. She didn't argue. She didn't question. But she left that room with a face that gave nothing away, which only added to the mystery. Interestingly, Camilla was reportedly not included in the earliest rounds of these discussions, a move that sparked whispers among palace aides. For someone who had long stood beside Charles as both confidant and queen, her exclusion raised eyebrows. Had she disagreed with the severity of the purge, or was Charles now choosing to consolidate his decision-making circle? What's undeniable is that the power vacuum left by Andrew's dismissal gave unprecedented control to the Royal Intelligence Director, an individual once overlooked by the public, now elevated as a silent architect of the monarchy's internal defences. With Andrew's team gone, resources were reallocated with strategic precision, protection protocols were quietly rewritten, and high-alert surveillance measures were reinforced, particularly around the future of the monarchy. George, Charlotte, and Louis became top priority. Their schedules, movements, and even educational environments came under a level of scrutiny previously reserved for reigning monarchs. The crown, it seemed, was no longer just focused on today's image, but tomorrow's survival. More significantly, the whispers of a transition in progress began circulating within the royal inner circle. One senior staffer reportedly confided, "It's not just about Charles asserting power, it's about William inheriting it, piece by piece, before the throne is ever passed." Every reshuffle, every adjustment, every internal memo suggested that authority was being delicately redirected toward the Wales household. Not with grand pronouncements or sweeping declarations, but with subtle, strategic placements. And through it all, William and Catherine remained outwardly poised, yet inwardly prepared, ready to catch the torch whenever it slipped from Charles's grasp. But not everyone agreed with the king's scorched earth approach, least of all those loyal to Andrew. And what they did next would ignite a dangerous ripple effect. The moment Andrew lost his security, the palace fracture widened. Former aides, old confidantes, and even sympathetic royals began whispering about retaliation. Was this just about protection, or was Charles drawing a battle line in the sand? In the days that followed the abrupt decision, the halls of the monarchy echoed with a different kind of silence, one laced with defiance. Andrew's inner circle, once quietly diminished, began to stir. Those who had faded into the background were suddenly active, seeking meetings, challenging protocols, and reviving alliances. Several of Andrew's former aides, some dismissed, some reassigned, requested urgent audiences with senior royal advisors. Though officially logged as routine check-ins, sources close to the situation revealed their true intent: to gauge the temperature, to ask the unspoken question, was there still a place for Andrew, or had the king declared all-out exile? What caught even seasoned insiders off guard was Lady Sarah Chatto's unexpected involvement, a figure known for her discretion and loyalty to the late Queen. Sarah's quiet approach to Charles was seen as deeply symbolic. She didn't plead. She simply asked questions no one else dared. Why now? Why this severe? Why without warning? Her presence in the discussion suggested that Charles's decision had stirred concern in corners of the family once considered neutral. And then came the whispers, leaked memos, misplaced correspondence, fragments of past operations that had long been buried. The rumors intensified, hinting that documents related to older, unresolved royal cover-ups were now circulating in dangerous hands. It wasn't clear where they came from, but everyone knew who had motive. Meanwhile, Sarah Ferguson, never one to bite her tongue, was reportedly furious. Sources claim she threatened to speak to media outlets if a reversal wasn't considered. One royal correspondent described her as on the warpath, warning that if Andrew was being sacrificed, the palace would not come away clean. She wasn't bluffing. She had lived through the worst of it and survived. Now, she was ready to play a card she had held for years. Caught in the crossfire were Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, both emotionally devastated and politically cornered. Their father's fall from grace now placed them in an impossible position, publicly loyal to the monarchy, yet privately torn. Friends described tearful conversations, tense family dinners, and a desperate attempt to maintain appearances. But one former staffer said it best: "They're not going down quietly. This is war." It wasn't about security anymore. It was about loyalty, legacy, and vengeance. And the danger wasn't just external. The fracture inside the royal household was widening into something far more volatile. Alliances were shifting, secrets were surfacing, and the line between family and threat was blurring fast. But while tensions escalated behind palace walls, a different kind of storm was brewing, one that would drag old secrets into the cold light of day. When power shifts, so do loyalties. And in the wake of Andrew's downfall, palace walls couldn't contain decades of secrets any longer. From old allegations to suppressed communications, explosive files began circulating among royal aides, many with Charles's initials at the top. It started as a whisper, an email forwarded to the wrong person, a forgotten file suddenly unearthed from deep within the palace archives. But soon, it snowballed into something impossible to ignore. Royal staff, once bound by duty and silence, began exchanging damning fragments of the past. At the center of the resurgence was a renewed examination of Andrew's shadowy financial entanglements. Settlements that had been quietly resolved now returned with chilling detail amounts, accounts, timelines, and questions no longer met with plausible deniability. But the real shock came when investigators reportedly uncovered a series of private letters between Andrew and Charles, allegedly revealing that the king, then prince, had intervened multiple times to keep his brother's indiscretions buried beneath a polished royal veneer. What these letters suggested wasn't just sibling loyalty, it was a pattern of calculated protection. Charles's name appeared not as a distant observer, but as a decision-maker, someone who had allegedly authorized or at least endorsed palace lawyers to handle troubling matters before they reached the public eye. Now, with Andrew's public stripping of protection, the hypocrisy began to bite. Critics pounced. Was this a righteous stand for accountability, or a monarch severing ties to shield himself? More disturbing were claims that legal counsel within the palace had, at the direction of senior royals, deliberately buried critical evidence tied to Andrew's past dealings. Emails from a now retired palace solicitor hinted at strategic disposal of paperwork during a high-profile investigation years prior. The revelations sent shockwaves through royal offices. Staff described a suffocating atmosphere of paranoia and disbelief. One aide reportedly broke down in tears after learning of the files, whispering, "It's all unraveling. Everything we protected is turning to ash." It's ohms. Outside the palace, the tabloids circled like vultures. One headline screamed across the front pages, "Security deal was just the start." Inside columns speculated on a broader purge to come, suggesting Charles was not merely distancing himself from Andrew, but burning the bridge entirely to prevent anyone from reaching what stood on the other side. The notion that Charles, who had long advocated for a more transparent monarchy, had once helped suppress scandal sent ripples through even the most loyal royal circles. The public, once divided, began asking a different kind of question: what else was hidden, and who else was complicit? As trust began to erode and protective alliances collapsed, the palace entered uncharted waters. The walls that once protected the monarchy now echoed with the weight of untold truths. But even as secrets spilled and reputations shattered, one royal insider would make a bold confession, changing the public narrative overnight. She had been silent for years, but when the decision came down to strip Andrew's security, a former palace official broke rank. Her chilling statement not only shocked royal watchers, it sent a tremor through the monarchy's moral core. The letter arrived without fanfare. No signature, no insignia, just a single page delivered to 3 major press outlets simultaneously. Within hours, its contents were published, dissected, and broadcast across every network. The words were precise, cold, and devastating. The writer identified herself only as a senior former palace aide, one who had served through 3 royal administrations and witnessed firsthand what she called the moral decay from within. Her words cut deep. The crown protected too long, punished too late, and now pretends this is justice. But it is not justice. It is damage control. She painted a picture, not just of Andrew's transgressions, but of a culture that enabled them, of whispered decisions made at midnight, of files buried under layers of bureaucracy, of loyalty used as currency and silence bought with fear. What shocked insiders most wasn't the claim itself, it was the fact that someone finally said it. Her testimony, though anonymous, included dates, names, meeting rooms. Specifics only a true insider could know. She recounted how Andrew's questionable associations were flagged repeatedly by concerned aides, only to be dismissed under the guise of family protection. She accused unnamed members of the legal team of manipulating reports. She claimed high-ranking officials deliberately delayed investigations to shield reputations. And, most explosively, she accused the top of the house, without naming Charles directly, of knowing far more than they ever admitted. The palace was thrown into chaos. Charles, sources said, was blindsided by the release. While he had anticipated backlash from Andrew's allies, he hadn't prepared for internal rebellion. This wasn't tabloid gossip. This was a call from inside the walls. Advisors scrambled to assess the fallout, but the damage was done. Parliament members, previously silent on royal finances, quietly began pushing for an inquiry into discretionary spending, specifically regarding Andrew's security and settlements. Questions that had once been avoided out of respect for the monarchy were now being asked in chambers with microphones and transcripts. More troubling still, the public began to shift. Where many had previously supported Charles's hardline stance as a symbol of modern accountability, the letter cast a new light, suggesting he wasn't the architect of justice, but the last man standing in a collapsing structure. Polls reflected a subtle but undeniable erosion of trust. Supporters now questioned the timing, the sincerity, and the silence that preceded it all. For the monarchy, it was more than an image crisis, it was a reckoning. The illusion of control had cracked, and behind it, the frailty of the institution was exposed. One woman's voice, long silenced, had found its moment, and in doing so, had shaken the royal foundation to its core. And yet, amid the chaos, one question lingered: was this the beginning of justice, or just another strategic sacrifice to protect the throne? Once guarded by the might of the crown, Prince Andrew now finds himself alone. No security detail, no schedule, no purpose. Stripped of power and shielded only by silence, his life in exile is a stark portrait of royal consequences, one Charles intends to make permanent. Gone are the cavalcades, the armed escorts, the men in tailored suits scanning rooftops and alleyways. In their place is a single unmarked car, a handful of privately contracted guards, and the burden of disgrace. Andrew, once a prince of privilege, now funds his own security if he can afford it. Sources close to the situation confirm he has been forced to dip into personal reserves, and even those are limited. Without crown resources to lean on, his movements are sporadic, his visibility minimal, and his inner circle shrinking. Once known for hosting grand affairs at Royal Lodge, Andrew now retreats to lesser-known estates properties so discreet they're barely marked on royal maps. Isolation is no longer a choice, it's survival. And with isolation comes abandonment. Those who once toasted him now avoid him. Former friends, business partners, even long-time confidantes have gone quiet. Invitations have dried up. Messages go unanswered. Not because they believe he's guilty of everything he's been accused of, but because being seen beside him is now a liability. In the upper echelons of British society, association has become contamination, and no one is willing to risk their proximity to power by standing too close to a man whose future has been so decisively erased. Even his daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, are caught in an emotional storm they can neither escape nor fully address. One is said to have begged the palace to grant him limited protection for public appearances. The other reportedly cancelled a scheduled royal engagement at the last minute due to the toll of the situation. Both love their father deeply, but both are also acutely aware of the cost of defending him too publicly. Loyalty or preservation? That is the cruel choice the Crown has forced upon them. Perhaps the most haunting detail comes from a staff member once assigned to Andrew's household, who claimed the prince now feels hunted, not safe. He reportedly sleeps with additional locks on his doors, avoids even the most casual public interactions, and has grown paranoid of being followed. Whether real or imagined, the threat consumes him. And still, Charles has not budged. Even after private appeals, even after efforts from within the family to soften the blow, the king's position remains unshakable. No reinstatement, no compromise, no return. But in the silence of exile, whispers grow louder, and the king himself is not immune from the cost of such ruthlessness. As public opinion divides and palace tensions boil, even King Charles is not escaping unscathed. Sources say the emotional toll is surfacing behind closed doors. Has the king overreached? And if so, who might be waiting in the wings, ready to clean up the aftermath? Behind the facade of decisive leadership, Charles is reportedly unraveling. Once praised for his measured temperament, he is now seen pacing through late-night meetings, abandoning long-held routines, and retreating further into isolation. Camilla, usually his stabilizing force, is said to be alarmed by his increasing volatility. Confidantes reveal whispered arguments, mounting frustration, and moments of visible exhaustion. The same man who once waited patiently for the throne now finds himself consumed by the weight of protecting it. His grip may have tightened around the reins of the monarchy, but at what cost to himself? In private, even the most loyal family members are sounding quiet alarms. Princess Anne, rarely one to question her brother, has reportedly urged caution. Her message was clear. Wars within the family have consequences that echo for generations. Prince Edward, ever the diplomat, has also suggested that this campaign against Andrew, though perhaps necessary, may be spiraling into something far more damaging. Both siblings, while supportive of a modernized monarchy, now fear that Charles's relentless push for control could leave him cornered and politically vulnerable. Amid the chaos, a quiet evolution is unfolding. William and Catherine, ever composed, have begun absorbing more responsibility behind palace gates and beyond. They are taking more briefings, issuing more guidance, and reportedly winning the confidence of senior aides. Their presence is calming, calculated, and increasingly central. For those watching closely, it's more than just preparation. It feels like positioning. As Charles burns through goodwill, they are quietly collecting it. It's a shift in dynamic that hasn't gone unnoticed by the inner circle. Within the palace staff, anxiety simmers. One senior aide reportedly posed the question everyone is now afraid to ask aloud. What happens if Charles collapses under the pressure? Health isn't just about the body, it's about resilience, clarity, and emotional endurance. And insiders say the king is stretched thinner than anyone imagined. As a result, contingency plans have been quietly discussed, council drafts reviewed, protocol examined, succession logistics quietly rechecked. No one is sounding the alarm publicly, but behind sealed doors, preparations are underway, just in case. And so, the central question remains, was this truly justice served, or vengeance cloaked in ceremonial dignity? Was it a moral stand, or a power play disguised as principle? Charles may have intended to restore order, but in doing so, he may have fractured more than he repaired. His campaign may be remembered not for its strength, but for the toll it exacted. And the man who once waited a lifetime to become king may now find himself racing against time to prove he deserved the crown. As the monarchy stands on the edge of another transformation, one truth remains. Behind palace gates, loyalty can vanish overnight, and power always has a price. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.